I was talking to my grandpa, who's very, very conservative, yesterday about Occupy Santa Rosa, and he brought up some good points about that. Like, you know, I mean, the 1%, like, I don't think, like he said, I don't think Bill Gates caused this whole mess, you know, and he's, you know, super rich, but he also created a lot of wealth and a lot of jobs.
How did he create jobs?
Oh yeah, that's kind of a funny pun on words because of Steve
No,
Jobs.
No, he didn't. He definitely didn't create Steve Jobs.
But well, I mean, he innovated, and he came up with technology that, I mean, basically he founded a corporation, right? So I don't know. I'm personally interested in kind of looking at each individual corporation, each individual bank, and everything, each individual rich person, and determining, like, I don't know, it's kind of just like to argue the whole, if they're rich, they don't deserve it. If they're rich, it's because they took it from someone else. Maybe, I mean, what if not? What if it's some definitely exploit, but what about the rest?
Yeah. Well, it's actually similar to, I think, how I feel about the police, is that it's not necessarily up to the individual, it's up to how the system is structured. So how do you determine who gets how much money? Is the common notion in this country, right, is if you work hard, the harder you work, the more money you get, right? So the people that work the hardest have the most money.
Yeah.
Would you argue that, like, working in a field 16 hours a day and bent over backwards picking food so people can eat is hard work?
It's hard
And
work.
you get paid the least money out of anybody.
Yeah.
Is that harder than sitting in an office and playing with stocks and, like, just playing with money and gambling with money?
Right.
Those are the people that, you know, or even as a boss, you're an employer. I mean, you're fulfilling a task maybe, but the work itself is not necessarily hard. It just has to get done. For me, it's like, it's important to have some certain core, like, principles. Like, I don't believe in being dogmatic, you know, and that's really important for us not to be too, like, rigid with our politics, but you got to have some core principles, such as, like, that democratic decision making is a good idea in terms of, like, justice and having a fair, you know, system. So we believe in that. We're taught that democracy is a good thing in the government, in the political realm. But the political realm doesn't really govern a whole lot, like, even a majority of our lives. What governs a lot of our lives is the economic realm. But the economic realm is run the exact opposite to a democracy, because if you're a boss, if you're an owner of a corporation, you are at the top, right? And whatever you say goes ultimately. You know, you might have management here, you know, your board of directors, and then your lower level management, and then your employees. But you make the decisions, and whatever you say goes. And if anyone, like, rebels against you, you can just fire them. So it's the exact opposite of a democracy. It's top down, it's not bottom up. And that's, we call that, like, totalitarianism, or like a dictatorship. So if we believe in democracy politically, if we actually believe in that as a value or as a principle, then we have to believe in it economically as well as politically. So what that means is that, you know, and another look at economics is that people, like rich people or owners of capital necessarily don't create jobs. What creates jobs is demand, basically. So if there's a demand for something, there will be a need to create more, so you'll need to hire more people to meet the demand. That can happen whether or not someone has money or not. I mean, people are going to meet their needs one way or the other. Right now, corporations are sitting on, I think, $2 or $3 trillion in excess cash and profits, and they're not creating any more jobs. They're actually laying people off. So, you know, looking at why did manufacturing leave the country, no one forced them to do that. They were making, I mean, it's people act like there was no rich people in the 1950s. I mean, that was a period of huge prosperity, and the tax rate on the top 1% was 91% of their wealth was taxed. Now it's 35%. So imagine that. And they were doing well. Like, they were millionaires. They were still millionaires in the 1950s, but they didn't want to be millionaires. They wanted to be billionaires. So it's just greed, and they were allowed to do that. So I think looking at that as a value, and also looking at alternative economic arrangements, which are more just, I think, you know, in the early 20th century, you saw people experimenting with state socialism, like taking over the state, and the state takes over the reins of government and kind of organizes everything. That doesn't really seem to work, because it's a very authoritarian model. It's very like the government then has control over everything, and it is almost always led to, you know, an undemocratic and, like, really repressive system. Might have had good intentions, but it's always led that way, you know. So I think it's interesting to look at, like, cooperative economic arrangements, collectively owned industries, worker-owned collectives that actually share the profits. Because, like, for example, in the East Bay, there's a bakery and cafe called Arizmendi. They're totally worker-owned. And they've been opening new stores and then creating jobs, but they're entirely worker-owned. But because they're able to determine democratically and actually by consensus, as a workforce, how are we going to spend our profits and how are we going to distribute the profits? And everyone has an equal say in that. They're able to open new stores like left and right, and they're popular. They're really, like, you go in on a Saturday morning and there's lines at the door and they have great stuff. And they have pizzas and stuff. So that's in Spain. The 5th largest corporation in Spain is called the Mondragon Corporation, and it's a network of worker-owned cooperatives. And it's the 5th most profitable company in the whole country. In Argentina in 2001, when the economy collapsed, much like ours just did, all the industry had left. I mean, all the rich people, they were like, screw this, I'm out, you know, and they had the ability, had the privilege to be able to just take all their money and leave the country. And they left all the factories abandoned, and the workers, you know, instead of saying, well, that sucks, I guess we'll just be unemployed, they actually broke back into the factories and retook them and started production up again. And hundreds of factories around Argentina, they were literally occupying, it was like one of their, it's funny that it's such a thing now, but it was one of their slogans was like occupy, it was like occupy, resist, create, or something like that was like their slogan. So they were breaking back into factories and running them as collectives, and there's a great documentary about it called The Take, about retaking these factories. So looking at that, it just seems like a more equitable, like just way to organize society. It seems more rational. It's democratic. I think sometimes we get caught in the debate. Well, it's either capitalism or like, you know, authoritarian socialism and like communism. You know, like it's either Stalin or like, you know, America, and it's like. That's just, we don't want to deal with that anymore. I don't want that to be the dichotomy. And that's why the Zapatistas are really beautiful, is because like they're like, we don't want to rule anybody. We're not going to tell everyone else what to do. Like they say, like, we believe in a revolution. We're not like having a revolution. We're having a revolution to make revolution possible. Which is that like our revolution is about creating direct democracy. And once there's direct democracy, then people can really change things. So the whole job creator myth, you know, there's all these myths that get like planted in people's heads from a very young age, and get, you know, repeated and repeated and repeated through, you know, the media and history books and stuff like that. It's all like, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Like, you know, if you're rich, it's because you earned it. If you're poor, it's because you haven't earned it. You know, you haven't worked hard enough. And it's just so false. It's just so, it doesn't reflect our experience. I work really hard. Like, why don't I have more money? That doesn't make any sense. You know, why do I have to struggle to pay bills and not have health care when I'm like, providing food for people? Like, that's a lot more crucial, like, work than, you know, whatever they call it, you know, hedge fund managers, you know, whatever they call it. Like, what are they providing for society? They're just leeches, in my opinion. It's like they're just leeching off of the work of the rest of us. So it's about creating a more equitable, you know, horizontal system.
Sure.
And it's, yeah, I don't know. I think it's important to have those values. And why I say it's good not to be dogmatic is because these values come from so many different places. It's not like one political tendency. It's not like just communism or just anarchism or just populism or like progressive politics. It's like you take these from a lot of different, these values that you see playing out in the occupation, like the ideas are coming from a lot of different places. Like consensus has been really used by like a lot of anarchist organizations and by environmentalist groups and like certain organizations. Like General Assemblies have been used by indigenous organizations and like indigenous movements. And so, and like the whole spark for this, a lot of it came from the Middle East and the Arab Spring. So it's like we're taking these like really good lessons from a lot of different places and like merging them and creating our own new politics, which is really exciting. And that's in Argentina. They created a whole new term, which is horizontalism. There's a whole book on it, which is great, actually. It's just interviewing people in the movement. It's just like, they're just saying, like, look, we don't even know what this is yet. We're, like, creating it as we talk right now. We're creating this new type of politics, which is, like, merging all these things and rejecting all this stuff that didn't work, rejecting, like, capitalism in a way, but also rejecting, like, state-run socialism and, like, rejecting, like, repressive government and creating something that's, like, totally new. So I think that's why it's really exciting. And I think that's what we have to move towards. And, you know, it's not about hating people. It's not about hating rich people. I say I hate rich people because I'm bitter, but I don't actually hate them, you know. But it is about like looking at the system. It's not about hating cops at all. It's about like recognizing that the system is unjust. Like if you look back 150 years ago, you know, most slave owners might have been very decent, nice people. Even people you see, like people that were lynching, you know, folks in the, you know, early in the 20th century. Those people went to church. They had families. Like, to a lot of people, they were decent, honest, like hardworking people. And then they would go lynch people, or they would have slaves. You know, it's a system. It's like a system that gets inside your head, and it turns you against yourself. It creates this like cognitive dissonance of like, well, I know I'm a good person, but I just did this awful thing, and so what am I going to say to justify that, to make myself sleep at night? And that's, you know, we're the job creators, or those people are inferior, you know, black people are inferior, you know. So it's like these myths that get created to justify this cognitive dissonance among people with power, because they're good people, but they're doing terrible things, and they need to be able to live with that. So that was a total tangent off what you were saying. But the job creation thing is a really important to talk about with people, because it's a myth, you know. These people are creating jobs. They're just sweatshop jobs in China, you know. And they're doing that because unions fought for the right to organize. They fought for higher wages. They fought for benefits. And they built up, by the 1950s and 60s, we had built up a really strong middle class in this country. And you could buy a house and feed a family being an auto worker and working in a factory or whatever. And the bosses just didn't like that. They were like, well, you know, we could make a lot more money just, you know. And so they've been working over the last 30 years to dismantle government regulations, and they've won. They really have won. Here, at least. But places like in Latin America, I mean, they've just straight out resisted them and revolted against them. Bolivia has an indigenous president now because they had a revolution there that said, you're not going to privatize our water supply. American companies wanted to literally privatize for profit their water. And the people said, no, you're not going to do that. And they rose up, and they, you know, so all around the world, that's what you just saw in the Middle East, people are rising up. And so that's, they're saying, we're not going to take this anymore. You know, you're not the job creators. You're not the chosen ones, you know, like, we're all equals here. If you want to join us on that, that's great. We're not going to lynch you. We're not going to put you in prison. Like you would do to us, you would put us in prison for resisting. We're not going to put you in prison. We're not going to hurt you. We're not going to seek vengeance. We just want you to, you know, be on the equal plane with us. And that seems fair.